Welcome everybody. My name is Corinne Fisher. I'm the coordinator of the Pacific Calling Partnership. You need to mute yourself. We're having a difficult start. We were trying to get in touch with Anote, who is in Suva, but there seems to be a problem with our capacity of participants for some reason on Zoom, which we had increased to 500, but it seems to be topping up to 100 for some reason, which is a shame because we had over 250 RSVPs for tonight. Anyway, what we've done is we've got Anote on the phone. So while we're trying to fix the problem, we might actually ask Anote to deliver his speech on the phone when the appropriate time comes. But without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to our facilitator for today, Sister Jan Barnett, who will take it from here. Thank you.
Who would have imagined a year ago that tonight would be taking place in this precise way? But within all the complexities and the hitches in which we now find ourselves, it gives me great pleasure to welcome each of you to what I know will be a significant experience for us all. As we begin, we acknowledge, as we always do, the traditional peoples of our lands from which we come. And we recognise, particularly in this COVID time, their unceasing witness to us of their connectedness to land and our responsibilities to care for earth and the whole of creation. And I know it's a truism, but aren't you struck tonight in this weird and amazing time, and there are more than 200 of us participating, that tonight is a particularly special gift to us. And for this reason, we want to thank all of you who are part of the Edmund Rice Centre's Pacific Calling Partnership for making this experience possible. I'm Jan Barnett from the Josephite Justice Network, and I'm honoured to be coordinating tonight's event. In times of crisis, we've often been told, if you want to look after the future, disrupt the present. And tonight, everyone, even in the mess we're in at the moment, we're privileged to welcome two extraordinary leaders who have taken that message to heart. His Excellency Anote Tong and Bishop Vincent Long join us as disruptive witnesses and truth-sayers for our time. Anote, the prophetic past President of Kiribati, and Vincent, the far-sighted Catholic bishop in the Australian Church. We welcome you both. Our presenters will speak for about 15 minutes each. Following this, there'll be another 20 minutes for questions before a brief reflection from Maria Simon Chiffon, a Kiribati woman living in Australia. The webinar, if it goes according to plan, will conclude at approximately 7:45. Could I just remind you as we begin to ensure your microphone is muted if you're not speaking. This webinar couldn't have come at a more important time. Climate emissions are surging as countries reopen. The Australian government, meantime, is choosing to endorse and promote a gas-fuelled future and is continuing its anti-renewables agenda, a situation not helped this week by the reported rift in Labor ranks. Meantime, this annual Pacific Leaders Retreat is due to occur in late October, and the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, is scheduled to event. Last year at this forum, he spoke of the Pacific as family. He promised his fellow Pacific leaders that Australia would develop a long-term strategy by 2020 for reducing Australia's greenhouse gas emissions. We really do need to ask, don't we? What has this undertaking meant in reality? what admissions, if any, will be made this year? Will the Prime Minister's commitment change from last year's? But we do know, don't we, that as long as this government refuses to take steps to reduce emissions, the very future and existence of the Pacific Islands, our family, is endangered. So there is much at stake. In the face of these clear emergencies confronting us, we do indeed welcome His Excellency Anote Tong and Bishop Vincent Long, and don't we love the way your two names rhyme, as well as your visions? I have no doubt at all that the world desperately needs the message of wisdom and challenge that you bring us. Our first speaker tonight, all things being equal, is His Excellency Anote Tong. Anote comes to us as a world-renowned leader in the battles against climate change. He speaks from his invaluable background, wisdom and presidency in the Pacific, pulling no punches in naming the climate emergency facing us and naming the urgency of the challenges facing us. And as he reminds everyone, every time he speaks, the fate of Kiribati, he tells us, is the fate of the world. Tonight, either face-to-face or on the phone, he'll share with us the realities facing Kiribati, the climate emergency in the Pacific, as well as his hopes for the upcoming Pacific Islands Forum in late October and its implications for Australia and the world. His message, we know, is critically relevant for our government and for all Australians. Anote, we're delighted to welcome you and so delighted that you can be with us.
Thank you, Jan, and as Madam Moderator, and of course I also acknowledge my fellow speaker for the evening, Bishop Long, and of course together with all of you who are here with us. And it's, I'm speaking on the phone right now. I'm unable to be on video. Nevertheless, I will try to deliver the message that I had prepared. So let me begin by a word of greeting. You know, in Kiribati, we always greet each other and we bless each other. So let me bless you. And I would bless you with a word of, it's a blessing, meaning may you be blessed. So let me bless you. Tonight, I'm extremely happy to be able to join this discussion, this conversation, and to try to deliver the message, which I must say I have been trying to convey year after year. Throughout my advocacy on climate change, I've always referred to climate change as the greatest moral challenge facing humanity. And that message, when I began to categorize climate change as the greatest moral challenge for humanity, remains the case, because we continue to be told, we continue to be given the science. When I started talking in 2004 about this, the science was still in the process of being resolved, particularly in the face of the strong lobby by the fossil fuel companies who continue to invalidate the reports coming out. At this stage, there is no question that with all of the evidence coming forward, the experience that we are seeing on an annual basis, Australia with the bushfires last year, and of course now we are seeing bushfires in the Northern Hemisphere and extreme weather conditions. All of this in combination with my own experience and what I'm seeing in my own country, together with the experience of countries like Tuvalu, the Marshall Islands, and the most vulnerable countries, most of them are actually in the Pacific region. And the message that I've always delivered on every trip that I've come to Australia is trying to communicate not only to the people of Australia, but also to the government, how critical Australia's role is in this fight against climate change. I've always believed that Australia has the capacity to take leadership on the climate debate. Over the last few months, we've been witnessing the kind of leadership that Australia has been able to take in response the aggression that China is actually undertaking in the South China Sea, that is highly commendable. And that in my mind, as I was watching this happening, I was hoping, why cannot similar kind of leadership be taken by Australia on the climate issue? And of course, we continue to be in this argument about whether climate change is real or not. For me, it is no longer a question. As I said, the evidence is so clear. We are just this morning and yesterday, I've been reading reports that the melting of the Greenland ice sheet has reached the point of no return. So, what further confirmation do we need? And as I said, it is the greatest moral challenge. And the reason I say that is because I think the science is there, but for some reason, we have not been able to pluck up the moral courage to make the right decisions. I've been to Australia. I was there last year and the year before, and I've continued to deliver a message which continues not to be fully received. I've been in discussions with leaders from Australia and New Zealand where I've been in confrontation with the arguments like, we cannot afford a global rise in temperature of less than 2 degrees centigrade, because anything less than that will be too detrimental to the development of our economy. My response was simply to say that I understand you, I can hear you, I see where you're coming from, but please do understand that for us, climate change is a survival issue, and it remains a survival issue at the time for countries like Finland. But the reality today is that it's no longer a survival issue for the most vulnerable. It's going to be a survival issue for those countries who. And so we remain unable to answer the question how to communicate to those who continue to disbelieve, those who do not have the moral caliber to make the decision to do the right thing. In 2015, I took the opportunity to visit Pope Francis. And the reason I did that was because I believe that the climate change as a deeply moral issue, spiritual issue, and on this issue, the global community needed spiritual guidance. And there was the only person that I could access was Pope Francis. And I did that. And literally begged him to intervene in the process, which he did. And but still, even within our own ranks, I think we're hearing contradictions. We haven't fully come to terms with what the reality of climate change is all about. And so, the question that I asked, where are we? After 2015, after the Paris Agreement, we're still not delivering those targets that we are committed to in Paris. We are still, my understanding is emissions have, I think it just made that point, Jan, that emissions continue to climb. So where are we headed? Are we ready to go all the way there? I'm sure nobody wants to do that. But the simple question that we're all unable to answer is, what is it that we must do in order to convey the message? And I think one thing that I believe we need to do ourselves is commit ourselves to it, because I think we're also part of the problem, in a sense. Because we continue to use the fuel that is being produced, that encourages the fuel companies to continue to sell the product. But I think the greatest challenge that we must face is how we prepare. Are we ready and willing to go where we are being taken, where we are heading? I believe the answer is no. And quite frankly, I was speaking to Australian young people just the other week, last week, and they asked me the question, what is it that we can do? And I said, continue to convey the message, especially the ones who really don't want to listen to, the ones who believe that they are untouchable with this challenge, the ones who believe they stand to gain, the ones who believe that when all of this comes down, they will not be affected in the same way that we are. Let me stop there, and hopefully comments that I have made would provide some provoke some debate and questions later on. But thank you. Let me stop there and wish you all the best. Thank you.
It's no wonder, Anote, that you've been acclaimed for your advocacy for Kiribati, and indeed for the whole of our planet. No wonder that you've been twice nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. I love what you have said to our Australian young people. I love what you have said about the truth of our situation in this time. Thank you for your ongoing disruption, for deepening our understanding of the stark realities facing the Pacific, and for reminding us of the challenges facing Australia and the world, and of our critical role in that, each and every one of us. You've confronted us, even though we couldn't see you, and I'm really sorry about that, with the indisputable price of inaction and the bare truth which can no longer be ignored. And we do look forward to hearing you further as you reflect in response to the questions that we'll have later in this session. So I'd like now to turn to Bishop Long, and we hope that this will be clearer to all of us. Bishop Vincent Long's background story reminds us of why he's ideally suited to be sharing what's at the heart of Laudato Si, the intrinsic relationship between the suffering of those who are poor and the fragility of the planet. Vincent will speak to us from his own rich experience as a boat person, an international leader of the Conventual Franciscan Friars, and his roles as the 4th Bishop of Parramatta and chair of the Bishop's Commission for Social Justice. He'll share his wisdom and insights from his reflections on Laudato Si, highlighting both our moral and ethical responsibilities as Australians to disrupt the status quo. Vincent, we welcome you and your disruption to all of us.
Thank you, Jan, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us at this forum. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we respectively gather, and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. As I scanned through my computer screen, I saw a lot of faces of concern, but also of real strong commitment and passion for the cause of our common home. And I can't help but notice the predominant presence of women at this forum. You remind me of the two disruptors par excellence, and that's the two Jewish midwives who asked the question that should also exercise our minds, which is what must we do so that the next generation can survive and flourish? And that's, I think, the context of our struggle, our commitment to the sustainability of our common home, our commitment to the kingdom, as we Christians would say. Jan, you mentioned that I have a background in being a refugee. Actually, today, this very day, I landed on the shore of an island in Malaysia after 7 days on the high seas. So 40 years ago, exactly today, I safely landed after that harrowing journey. So I do have an existential relationship with the ocean. I'd like to thank His Excellency Anote Tong for his passionate appeal tonight for climate action, and also for his leadership on an issue that's been described as the great moral challenge of our time. His Excellency has been at the forefront of raising global awareness about the adverse risks caused by climate change. With his atoll nation, Kiribati, being about 2 meters above sea level, he has warned the world that failure on climate action could pose an existential threat to his people and other low-lying Pacific islands. Entire communities and their ancient heritage could be destroyed in a matter of a decade or so. But it's not just those low-lying atoll nations in the Pacific, but the whole planet. Our common home is on the verge of climate catastrophe. The evidence given by the world's scientists with data collected over long periods of time should give us ground for concern. We cannot go on living the way we have. We cannot continue to destroy our rainforests, pollute our environment, and burn fossil fuels without dire consequences. Anote's message has found a great ally in Pope Francis, who is the voice of truth and conscience for the world. I think he's been sent to us in order to wake us to the reality of the deep alienation which threatens our very, very existence. Alienation from the creating God, from nature, from one another, even from the truth itself, as Anote referred to in his speech just now. And that alienation reverberates through our relationship with the earth, that is our common home. In biblical tradition, prophets rise up from the landscape and announce the future different to that of the dominant narrative. They provide an alternative vision to that of the empire. They speak of God's intention with a burning passion, a sense of urgency and discomfort, such as we discern from the voice of Anote just now. In many ways, Anote is a contemporary prophetic voice that speaks truth to power. He's from one of the smallest nations at the periphery of the world, yet like the ancient prophets, I dare to say, it is the voice from elsewhere, the voice from outside that subverts, or to use your term, Jan, disrupts the status quo. His is an energizing message that envisions a new reality. He challenges us, but also energizes us to bring about the transformation that God, the Creator, intends. Mr. Tong has played a leading role in the Paris Climate Accord and the global moratorium on fossil fuels, for which he was nominated the Nobel Peace Prize. Scientists predicted long ago that extreme weather events would happen if carbon emissions were not reduced. And these predictions have come to pass with devastating effects, such as the bushfires that ravaged Eastern Australia only last summer. During this coronavirus pandemic, political leaders everywhere, by and large, have followed the advice of scientists in enacting public health policies that prevent the spread of the virus and protect life. Unfortunately, though, there has not been a strong and decisive leadership when it comes to fighting climate change. Instead of uniting behind the science and enacting favorable public policies, many leading industrial nations, including Australia, have regressed or even reneged on the Paris Climate Accord, which limits global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above the long-term average to reduce the worst impacts of climate change. So clearly the policy directions in relation to cutting carbon emissions that our government has chosen in recent times go against the signs of the times, international agreements, and the advice of scientists or even emergency services chiefs. These have been very clear, for instance, that the bushfires were made much worse by human-induced climate change. Yet our government has not even acknowledged this. Australia's current climate policies are viewed globally as among the worst in the world, I'm sorry to say. So as a nation, we cannot claim to be a responsible global citizen in addressing the moral challenge of our age, while we lag behind other nations on climate action and continue to subsidize all polluting industries. It is true that we are responsible for a comparatively small amount of carbon emissions, but it is no reason not to act and to show leadership. Why? Because Australia has always prided itself on punching above its own weight. As Sir David Attenborough remarked, that we are the keepers of an extraordinary section of the surface of this planet, a very large section of the surface, and that includes also that wonderful, that gem of a place called the Great Barrier Reef. So what we say and what we do globally on this issue does matter. Anele Sapoaga, the former Prime Minister of Tuvalu, wrote in the Canberra Times the other day, reminding our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, of the promise he himself made shortly after the latter came into power. He promised that Australia would work more closely than ever with the Pacific Islands on those issues of great concern to them, including climate solutions and disaster resilience, and would keep its international commitments made in these areas. Sadly, we are yet to see this promise fulfilled. Instead, Mr. Sapoaga, like Mr. Tong, laments that we have seen a move to ramp up Australia's fossil fuel industry. As Australia and most countries prepare for the post-COVID-19 economic recovery, it is crucial that we don't dig ourselves out of one crisis only to find ourselves in another. Scientists are quietly confident that they will be able to develop a vaccine for the coronavirus. Unfortunately, though, the climate crisis that threatens to wipe out our neighboring nations cannot be addressed with a vaccine. So the pandemic reveals a world that is fractured. It tells us that the dominant mode of human conquest and dominion is no longer sustainable. The human-centered planet is out of sync with nature and heading to ruins. We may be on top of the food chain, but our survival depends on our partnership, our cooperation with every form of life. We need a radical new way of relating and living that brings harmony and sustainability to all forms of life. We humans are part, not apart from, but a part of that interconnected cosmic web of creation. And so we need to live a new paradigm of communion with all that is. We need a radical new way of living that brings harmony and sustainability to all of life. So even if when we get back to normal, we need to think and act differently. We need to rewire ourselves, so to speak, to be in communion, in sync with one another as a human family, but also as part of nature, part of the living planet. We need to abandon the old paradigm of competition and survival of the fittest. Grab whatever you can that undergirds much of our consumerist, capitalist economic system of buying life at any cost. We will perish under these conditions unless we return to the roots of nature and rewire ourselves to be part of nature. So we need to have a conversion of mind and heart that leads to a conversion of the way we live, conversion of our lifestyle. So I wager that each of us can begin to live life simply and poorly. Australia is the largest exporter of coal, but individually, we are also responsible for producing huge amount of greenhouse gases. We have one of the highest per capita emissions of carbon dioxide in the world. So we simply cannot leave the greenhouse problem to the big players like governments, energy companies, industry leaders, and the like. There are practical measures that we all can do in order to reduce our carbon footprint, like investing in renewable energy, divesting from fossil fuels, consuming less and wasting less. That must be the way for us Christians to give new expressions to the very first beatitude, to live the spirit of poverty and simplicity. In our struggle to influence policy and decision makers in respect of the climate action, it is easy for us to give in to defeat and apathy. Significant social changes, we often reason, rely on the participation and conversion of large numbers of people. But then there is also an alternative image to critical mass that is called the critical yeast in the Bible. So instead of asking a question about quantity, about how many people we can marshal, the question becomes who or which people in this situation would have the capacity, if they were mixed and held together, to make things grow exponentially, even beyond their numbers. So each of us can become critical yeast for critical time by virtue of our commitment, dedication, networking, and shared leadership. In this way, we can create a movement from below that challenges the inaction, or worse, the collusion with the strong, powerful fossil fuel industry from above. Pope Francis often speaks of the culture of globalized indifference. Australians and Catholic Australians in particular, I think, need to build a broad coalition gathering around the issue in order to give a counter witness to that culture of globalized indifference. We need to amplify the prophetic voices of people like Anote and Pope Francis. It will reverberate through our parishes, our schools, our communities, and to the broader society. It will inspire what I call a new Laudato Si generation, and together we can bring the urgent message of reconciliation and healing to our broken earth. And I attended a Laudato Si summit organized by Catholic Earth Care, and I could tell you that thousands and thousands of our young people are passionate about the issue of climate change, and they're not sitting still. They are active in not only living that message, putting into practice the message of Laudato Si, but also sharing that message to the broader audience. Pope Francis issued that encyclical and called for an ecological conversion. In that prophetic document, we have a blueprint for a sustainable future, a future that the next generation can not only survive, but flourish. And that future is based on respect and love for this beautiful planet. The encyclical is offered to us as a timely reminder that we humans are part of that cosmic web of creation, and we need to live in sync with it. Today, we're also challenged to move beyond the old patterns of living and behavior, both individually and collectively. In the light of the environmental crisis that demands a conversion of heart and a change of lifestyle, we must have the courage to align ourselves with the Creator's plan for the world. And only by acting in the best interests of the environment, of the poor, of the future generations, can we save this planet from devastation, and can we ensure a viable future for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vincent. You've reminded us powerfully of how intrinsically we are part of Earth and part of each other. I love your question from the Jewish midwives, what must we do so the next generation can survive and thrive? And you remind us that what we do does matter in this fractured world. You call us to a prophetic voice, and we're very conscious of that. As you point out, the truth around these outlaws indifferences, and any tendency of our country and our government to isolate ourselves in our own comfort and in what Francis, quoted by you, calls our globalised indifference. We really need to move forward, conscious that across the Pacific and indeed across our whole planet, our brothers and sisters, our lands and creatures, as you point out, are suffering and disappearing from Earth. And as you also point out, in all of this, Australia has shown itself to be one of the worst nations in the world. And yet you do remind us there's hope if we're prepared to take action, that we can together create a world that is flourishing for all. You call us to disrupt the status quo in the way we challenge and in the way we energise. And this call to eco-conversion, I think, is something that will sit with us for a long time. So we are so grateful both to you and to Anote. We are blessed in our leaders at this time. And now we have time for a number of prepared questions, and Corinne will facilitate these. Sorry, I also need to mention that Anote is back online.
Welcome back, Anote, and Welcome back, Anote, and my sincere apologies for tonight's technical problems. We clearly need more practice at this, which is a call to have more seminars, more webinars of this kind in the future. So our sincere apologies to everybody. We'll be circulating the recording. As Jan said, we've had a number of questions that have been pre-submitted. And I want to particularly highlight the aspect of Bishop Long's speech that spoke about critical yeast. I think we're all critical yeast here. And in a way, this is the purpose of this webinar tonight, is of course to listen to, two very well respected leaders that are doing everything they can to fight climate change and its impacts on the world and of course the Pacific, but also to ask ourselves, well, what can we do? And there is a very critical meeting that is coming up in late October, which is the Pacific Islands Forum Virtual Leaders Retreat. So you'll recall, and this was the background for Anilesa Puanga's opinion piece in the Canberra Times, that at last year's Pacific Islands Forum, Morrison, our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, really fought a lot of the measures that the small Pacific nations were trying to get into the communique to advance, lowering emissions, etc. And this year, this will be again on the agenda in late October. So my first question that was submitted is for His Excellency Anote Tong. What is your understanding of the dynamics relating to the upcoming Pacific Islands Forum virtual leaders meeting in late October 2020, which our Prime Minister Morrison is expected to attend?
Thank you, Corinne. Yes, I watched what happened last year, and there is no question.
Can't hear.
Are you hearing me?
There's a little bit of an issue with the sound, Anote. Yeah, maybe.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Thank you. Yes, let me focus. Yeah, I don't think the position of the Pacific Island nations themselves has changed because the climate issue remains unaddressed. I am hopeful that what happened.
Still can't hear.
Last. Hello. I'm hopeful that what happened in Australia towards the end of last year would have hopefully contributed to some change of thinking by the Australian government in general, but specifically the Prime Minister, who had to come back from his holiday somewhere in order to see what was happening with the fires. And I mean, again, you don't need much more evidence than that to confirm that this is an Australian issue. It's no longer just the issue for countries like Kiribati, Tuvalu, the Marshall Islands. It's as real to Australians as it is to us, because climate change comes in different forms. What I'm really hoping would happen is that those leaders that remain unable to make the commitment will find the courage to do the right thing. I know that there are pressures under which they are put. I understand politics, but I think on occasions like this, sometimes we need to forget that we are politicians and need to remember that we are leaders, we are parents, we are grandparents, and that we have a responsibility for the future generation. And that is the message, that is the take that I hope will happen in the upcoming meeting. I think the leadership that the Prime Minister of Australia has taken on the South China Sea issue, I think that's highly commendable. The backlash that from with the trade sanctions that it faced, and doubling down, I think if Australia would simply do this on climate change, Australia could actually take leadership, and I truly hope that Australia will do that. New Zealand, I think, is more on board on this than what probably was the case in previous with the previous governments. But I think it does not have to be what party is in government. I think, as I said, this is an issue. It's a human issue. It is not a political issue. I hope we really can appreciate this. I hope that answered a very difficult question to answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Anote. It was a difficult question. I think one of the things that we can all do, and we'll be speaking a little bit about that later on in the webinar towards the end, but one of the things that we can all do is ask our Prime Minister to do the right thing at this Pacific Islands Forum in late October, and we'll be talking a little bit more about how we can do that. I've got a question that actually came from Johanna Larkin, who's not on the call because she couldn't get in. She was one of the people that couldn't get in. So I will ask the question on her behalf. This question is for Bishop Long. With respect to your work on the issue of climate change, Bishop Long, how can we get the Australian Catholic Church in Australia to be more active on the climate change issue?
Thank you, Corinne, and it's good to see Anote's face on the screen. So a wave to you, and thank you for your speech this evening, but more so thank you for your leadership on the issue of climate change. And know that even though you come from a small nation, but you have the profile and the stature that a lot of us look towards as a source of inspiration, as a prophetic voice. As I said, you know, the prophetic voice often comes from outside, from the periphery, and I think you fit that description. Now, back to that question of the commitment of the church leaders on the issue of climate change. I think there has been a monumental shift thanks to Pope Francis. His leadership on the issue of climate change has garnered a lot of support from Catholics and non-Catholics too, across the globe, and I think it has some impact on the way that local leaders here, church leaders, operate. And you know, I can think back to the recent assembly of the bishops of Oceania, and the theme of that assembly was care for our common home. So we rode on the back of the launch of the new encyclical, and also we were conscious that the people in the region are adversely impacted by climate change, and you know, even as we spoke, there were big multinational companies going into the Pacific, doing things like deep sea mining, and which was, you know, unthinkable in this day and age. You know, that people should extract minerals from the ocean without regard for the environmental effect. So I think the bishops of Australia, by and large, or share the concern, share the issue of climate change with varying degrees of passion, and I hope personally I can continue to be the voice from the Bishops' Conference of Australia in respect of this issue, and in respect of social justice generally.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all your work on this issue. There's actually a related question from Ollie. Ollie, are you on the call?
Yes.
Do you want to ask your question? It's quite related to what I just asked, but is there anything specific, anything more specific that you'd like to ask on the topic from Bishop Long?
No, So I was born in Brazil, and so have lots of family in Brazil where, you know, we have a very evangelical president at the moment who's also...
Can't hear the question.
Just give him a second. He's just giving you the context. Yeah. Go.
Yeah. I was just saying, so I was born in Brazil, and we have a very evangelical president at the moment who's also a climate change denier, which is a similar sort of trend in those kinds of sort of evangelical religious communities in the US, in Brazil, here in Australia even. So I wanted to know what the panelists' views, Anote and Bishop Long as well, on how the religious communities and leaders can, I guess, speak those truths and power to, you know, those more conservative voices in the religious communities that are blocking the action that we need on climate change.
Can I me to respond to that?
Yes. Yeah. Please.
Okay. I thank you, Bishop Long, for your comments much earlier. But the question that was raised and directed to you was something that I believe that it is important that not only just Catholics, but every organization, every faith-based organization should focus on climate change and understand the injustice that is involved in it, the deep moral issue that is involved. But I'll explain one of the very reason that I went to Pope Francis was actually to address the very question that was raised, the very problem. Because as I was talking about climate change, I was getting contradicted by our church leaders, okay? And in my country, which is predominantly Christian, you don't contradict church leaders, otherwise you lose the next election. And so I had to go to the next highest boss. And, if I was able to go to God, I would have been able to go and ask him if he could intervene in the whole process. But I think it's actually it's a much bigger issue than just a Catholic issue. It's a deeply moral issue. It's a spiritual issue, and it has to be applicable to other faiths as well. And I think the reason that I went to Pope Francis was he was the only one because I am Catholic, and he was the only one that I could access. But if I could have gone to other church leaders, religious leaders, I would have done the same because the message is the same. It's about justice. It's about understanding that we are destroying this wonderful creation of God simply for whatever reason. And so, yes, I understand the comment that the young man who from Brazil was facing. I understand the problem that he was facing in Brazil because I faced the very same problem. I had comments like, you know, God has already made the promise in the covenant that there would never be any flooding. So how can you be an atheist and say this? And so I needed some resolution. I thought going to the highest spiritual guide would provide that kind of a guidance. And I've been eternally grateful to Pope Francis for having delivered the encyclical in 2015, having delivered a statement in the US Congress, and having delivered a statement at the United Nations General Assembly. And I believe in all of my heart that without that intervention, I believe we would not have had the Paris Agreement. So I am very grateful, and I think he made that difference. I think, I'm sure many of us would believe that. But yes, I think that was my comment on the question that was raised. It was, there would always be differences of opinion. There's no question in my mind that we still have church leaders in my country who continue to question that. Thank you. I hope it addresses the question that was raised.
Thanks, Anote. And we've actually got another related question for Bishop Long from Jackie Remen. Jackie, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you.
Thank you both for your presentations. They've been incredibly inspiring tonight. And my question is to both of you, actually. So given your role as leaders in the Pacific with church and nation, and the call for critical climate action, that urgent call, what do you think about the example that was set by the Synod on the Amazon, that lifted up the voices of people and diverse cultures and unique ecologies? And following that exemplar, to have a synodal process in our region of Oceania at this critical time for the Pacific. What do you think of that, and how that might happen and what it would mean? Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jackie, Raymond, for the question. And I think the Synod on the Amazon was one of the greatest synods in recent times, in that it gave focus to it gave worldwide attention to an issue that is not just pertinent to the region of Amazonia, but across the globe, and it raised awareness about the protection of the rainforests and the human rights of the indigenous peoples, and how human life, culture, and the environment are all linked. So that you destroy the environment, you destroy culture, you diminish human life, and that's what the Synod on the Amazon did, and I think the people in our region face similar issues, and so we need to bring that to the fore in whatever way we can, so that political action, decisive political action, can come about and bring about positive change. I do think, though, Jackie, that while it's important to have a formal synod like the Synod on the Amazon, to draw greater attention to this issue at hand, but we cannot discount the role of citizens and the way that we work together to bring about change and transformation. The Synod on the Amazon is a very unique synod, in the sense that it took place in Rome. It had the presence of Pope Francis, and the world's attention was placed on it for the length of the synod. I'm not quite sure if we could convince the Vatican to hold the synod on the Pacific to the same extent. Who knows? It might be possible, but I think while that mechanism is important, let's not discount our own effort, which can also create the momentum for change that we desire.
Thank you for that. And is Monique on the call? Monique Gooch? No? Okay, I'm going to ask, are you here? Okay, fantastic.
Yes.
You want to ask your question, Monique? I think that was a question for Anote.
Yes, I do have a question for Mr. Tong. Anote, you mentioned in your talk about leadership and moral courage. Given we're lacking a bit of that in this country, I'm wondering what, in your opinion, are the top 3 kind of key actions the Australian government could take to fight climate change in the Pacific now?
Thank you for that question. No, let me put it another way, okay? Because in all the time that I've been involved in this advocacy, I've often asked myself the question, are we addressing our questions with the right people? I've almost come to the conclusion that maybe it is not the governments that will answer the question, or that can answer the question. It's because they're not the ones, they may not be the ones that are making the decisions on this. Because in 2008, it was my very clear understanding that climate change was the top of the agenda in Australia. Yet, when the government came in, it didn't put it on top of the agenda, but did the reverse. But then I began to wonder, well, how this happened? Because I'd been saying in my talks in Australia, if you want anything to be done about climate change, make it a political issue. And so it became a political issue, but yet it's began to slide down the agenda, and it's no longer at the top of the agenda with this government. And so my conclusion is that we are talking with the wrong authority. Maybe we need to address our questions to those who actually cause it, who really don't want the change in the status quo. And I know, Jan, you love being disruptive, all right? And my advice to the young people was this, okay, the people who really are at the cause of this, who are making our governments do this, or not do anything about it, are the ones that we need to tackle. So go and visit the schools where their children are, talk to their children so they can talk to their parents, to tell their parents that unless they do something about what they're doing, their future will be in jeopardy. And so we've got to retarget, because I know there was talk about the synod. I think we've maybe converted all of the moral people, but we haven't converted the immoral ones who have no desire to be converted. So we need to retarget the ones, and we need a new strategy in order to be effective. Because we are talking to ourselves, the ones that would already believe. We need to talk to the ones who don't want to know about it, who really want to keep on doing what they're doing because they believe they benefit by it and are untouchable by it. So that is my answer. Not necessarily the governments, those who might be controlling.
Thank you. That's
I hope that answered the question.
That's a very strong position, Anote, and a very strong piece of advice for us. So thank you very much for that. That came across very clear. That probably is a good note to conclude our question and answer session. And I'm going to we have one more question from Phil, of course, the director of the Edmund Rice Centre. So over to Phil.
Thank you. And thank you, Vincent. Look, my question is in 2 parts. Both of you talked about moral leadership, spoke about speaking the truth to power. Both of you have done that in your nations, in the state, in the church, and internationally. You've been doing it for lots of years, and my theory is that actually when you get over the target, you're going to get flack. People are going to attack you, people are going to criticize you, publicly people may tell stories about you. And if we're doing the same thing, if we're trying to follow in your footsteps, we have to expect the same things to happen. So my question to both of you is, the first part is, what has sustained you in the face of that to keep going? And secondly, what advice would you give to all of us that would sustain us for the struggles that are ahead, particularly as we face a health crisis, an economic crisis, and of course we face the climate crisis? So what sustains you and what needs to sustain us?
Bishop Long.
Oh, thank you, Phil. St. Francis has a saying, or maybe it's attributed to him anyway, that preach the word or preach the gospel using words if necessary. So I think there's a lot of truth in that. You have to internalize. You have to own the word. You have to live the word before you can speak it. And so I think the speaking or the public profile is like a tip of the iceberg. There's something greater that should ground you, and that something is your sense of belonging, your sense of commitment, your spiritual grounding, and I think in some sense we can't be a prophet without being a mystic, without the ability to live, to wrestle, to even to some extent suffer for your conviction, for your belief. So that inner nurturing is so important, I think that there's also that sense of fellowship, that sense of communion, as it were, because you can't sustain of your own device in the long run. You need the sense of being in fellowship with others that gives you that power to stay afloat, and yeah, to me it has to do with living mystically, living in communion, living in communion with your God and your fellow men and women.
Thanks, Vincent. Anote.
Thank you, Phil. Well, you made a very clear point. What do you know? Because in a position where you're saying these loud statements, where you feel, a lot of people feel threatened by the message that you're saying. A lot of people might feel threatened by the very fact that you exist. And I, since being in office and since leaving office, I have been subjected to a lot of that, and I can assure you, it is not an easy thing to do, to believe something terribly, so passionate about something, and to be attacked sometimes at a very personal level. And there are times when I just want to put my head down and forget all about it. But I'll tell you, a couple of things actually sustain me. One is that it's my wife's. Well, there are times when I said, I'm going to retire. I don't want to do this anymore. But my wife keeps saying, no, you cannot, because you'll never be at peace with yourself. And it will always haunt you, which is the truth. And the reality is this. And I've often said it sometimes aloud, that I wish I couldn't see what is coming, because my own way, I can see it. And I cannot understand why so many people cannot see what is coming, the catastrophe that is coming, the tragedy that is coming. And as I said, I wish I could not see. And having that sort of a imagination which makes me see things which many people do not see. I think about my 20 grandchildren. What is to become of them? I think about all of the people in Kiribati. I think about all of the people in Tuvalu, and what is to become of them? It must not be a political. It's too valuable for that. It is something that we need to treat very carefully and assess, and not just toss it aside as being inconsequential. I think that's what been keeping me going. Thank you.
Okay. And occasionally go fishing.
Just to forget about things. Yes.
Thank you. Jan?
Thank you to all our questions. Thank you for all our contributors. And we'd like to finish tonight's webinar with a reflection from Maria Simon Chiffon. Maria is a member of the Pacific Calling Partnership from the Edmund Rice Centre, and she'll speak from her experience as a Kiribati woman living in Australia. Maria, as so often, we welcome your wisdom and your truth.
Hi everyone, I want to begin with my traditional way of welcoming everyone. I'm Nathaniel Mary.
Yeah,
Maria, we can't hear you.
Me now?
I can hear you.
Maria.
Maria, are you here? I can see Maria. Would you like to speak? Are you unmuted?
Jan, just wrap it up. I think her internet's frozen.
Oh, internet's frozen.
Yeah, her picture's frozen. Yeah, so just go to me. That's fine.
I'm sorry, everyone, but we seem to have Maria's computer is muted and it's frozen. So I'd like now to hand back to our panel here, who will finish off with thanks for the evening.
All right. Look, Phil, do you want to?
I will. Just before we do that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to butt in here to thank Corinne and the team at PCP at the Edmund Rice Centre for the work that they've done in getting this together. You'll be pleased to know that Zoom have now, for some miraculous reason, enabled everyone to participate. So the wonders and mysteries of the internet. You may or may not know that His Excellency Anote Tong is in Suva, not in Kiribati, and has been there since the borders of Kiribati were shut down after he went to Fiji for the weekend back in April, and he's still there. So Anote, we are deeply appreciative of the fact you're able to join us. On that note, I'll go to the formal vote of thanks. I'm going to hand over to Corinne Fisher. Corinne is coordinated tonight with Jan, and it's no easy task. And I just wanted to vote in to thank Corinne particularly for all her great work.
Yeah.
Thank you, Phil. This has been the most stressful Zoom webinar I've ever had until now. So I'd just like to thank our speakers, particularly for your patience and your grace in putting up with what has been quite a technically challenging session. But thank you so much. And I'm hopeful that we'll get another practice soon. I just coming back to this issue of critical yeast. I wanted very much to leave it on this note. We have got this very important Pacific Islands Forum virtual leaders meeting coming up in late October, and we would like to leave people with a call to action to contact their federal MP if you have been touched by what you have heard today from Anote and from Bishop Vincent. Please consider taking action by contacting your federal member and asking them to ask the Prime Minister to do the right thing by the Pacific and by Australians and by us children and grandchildren, and actually commit to reducing emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, and ramping up those commitments to the Paris Agreement targets. And what we will do after this seminar is we will circulate the recording of the webinar, and we will also circulate a template letter which you can use to write to your federal MP. And if you could take that action within the next couple of weeks, next few weeks, that would be really appreciated, and we'd be really grateful for that. And we'll also be calling, we've got your emails, and we'll also be calling on you in the next couple of months to help us ramp up the pressure on our Prime Minister to do the right thing at that meeting in late October. So trying to do our bit and be the critical yeast is very, very important. Mm-hmm. All right, I'd like to bid you a good night. Especially in Fiji, and that they must be quite late. So thank you very, very much again for your patience and for your support, and take care, stay well, and we'll talk again soon. I would also like to thank our facilitator, Sister Jan Barnett, who has also had to put up with incredible stress during this webinar, and she's done it with grace and with assurance, and we were very, very lucky to have her as our facilitator. Thank you so much. All right, good night, everybody.
And so,
thank you to everyone.
As we finish tonight, I think if we have learned anything from all our speakers and the participants is the importance not only of the global community, of our governments, and our local communities, but each of us as individuals. And we have just been really encouraged to take action, each one of us, and hopefully we can do that in the next few weeks, particularly if we really are concerned about the conversion and transformation that both Anote and Vincent have reminded us of. So thanks, Corinne, for all your work. And as we conclude tonight, I'd like us to take with us the words and hope of the Black American activist John Lewis, who died last month. He told us, "We will find a way to make a way out of no way. Let's all do it." Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.